Hey everyone! Hello and welcome to Bridge to Revenue. We are a podcast dedicated to bridging silos between cross-functional partners in order to optimize enablement for revenue teams. I am one of your co-hosts, Charles DeRupe. I call myself a revenue enablement nerd.
Hi, everyone. Natalie Spivak here as your other co-host. And today we are very excited to be joined by David Kreiger, the founder and president of SalesRoads. And David has over 20 years of experience building high-performance sales teams. He's very thoughtful and methodical as a leader and has had a lot of success juggling a lot of different priorities over the years, including the continuous development of his sales team. So, and by the way, speaking of juggling, as a fun fact, David likes to juggle in his free time. So with that, David, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Natalie and Charles. It's great to be here.
Ooh.
Awesome. So, David, based on some previous chats that we've had in the past, I know that sales training and development is really core to your business. To start off, who within your organization is involved in leading these enablement efforts?
Yeah, so I think great enablement starts from the top. And in many ways, actually, I lead sales enablement, at least spearheaded, and we'll talk about some of the specifics. But I think it really, and you guys talk about silos, so it's really important to make sure that enablement is kind of everywhere. And to be able to do that, leadership really has to take a role in at least living enablement, like thinking about enablement, breathing, and actually being a part of enablement. And so we'll talk about our structure. It's a bit interesting, but we've tried to kind of like sprinkle enablement throughout, which has really helped us in our sales enablement journey.
I love that and am excited to hear more, but I can already see why it's been effective because of how ingrained it is in the culture and not just one particular role. So in terms of thinking about your different enablement efforts, before we start to talk about some wins that you've had over the years, let's start off with when things haven't gone to plan. Can you tell us about a time when an enablement initiative failed or didn't go to plan?
Somewhat early in SalesRoads' journey, we combined two roles that we've subsequently spread out. So we had what was called a program manager. And so, for your audience, we're a B2B SDR outsourcing company. So, our clients look to us when they are either having trouble managing an internal SDR team, or maybe they want to start doing proactive prospecting. They're not sure where to start. So they'll come to SalesRoads and they'll outsource that functionality to us. So with that, we have sort of two management responsibilities. We have an individual who is working with the client, right, and managing the client relationship. But then we also have the SDRs who need to be managed. And so what we did for the beginning of SalesRoads is we made that one role as a program manager. So that same person was managing the client and managing the SDRs underneath them for that client. And they would also manage, a few different clients. Mm-hmm. And what we found, and I think this is true in a lot of things, but in enablement, it's very hard to do two things very well. And both are difficult jobs, right? To manage a client and to manage your SDR team. And so the way that we structured our organization, fail is maybe a strong word, but we weren't having the success that we wanted, right? So and a big part of how we quantify success is through, lack of churn, right? So clients staying with us, and not canceling, and continuing on. And so we felt that our churn rates were just too high, and we took a look and we realized that combining that role and having somebody manage both the client and manage and train the SDR team was just too much. And so I think a lot of organizations have that issue, right? They put enablement. Maybe you have a little free time, or maybe you've done a little training before, right? And they just throw it onto somebody else's lap. And I think you have to be very intentional about the way that you are structuring your organization around enablement, the people that you choose to have those roles, and then also make sure that they've got the time and the bandwidth to do it right. Because what we found is that two things happened. One, either the people who were really good at client management gravitated towards that and they did more of that and less of the SDR management. Those who were better at SDR management did that and didn't manage the client as well. But even if somebody tried to do both, it's just you have to switch to two very different hats. And so the learning from that, and we'll get into the ways that we restructure, is just you got to think. Especially when you're thinking about things that are cross-functional in nature, it starts with how you structure the organization, the org chart. And that was a lesson that we learned, is we just combined two things that really shouldn't be combined.
I love that reflection, because especially for startup or early stage organizations that don't yet have a dedicated enablement, that's definitely often the case, that managers, others within the org are taking on that enablement role without necessarily the experience, or more importantly, like you said, bandwidth to be able to take that on. And you did mention that upon realizing this, you made some shifts internally. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so what we did is, instead of managing as a program manager for a client, we created what we call pods. And so it's a cross-functional team, and that whole pod is assigned a client. And so what we did is we had what became our director of client success, who is the person who's managing the client, who was heading the pod, right? So they would work with the client, they'd manage the client, they'd understand the strategic direction. But they were really tasked with managing the client and the high level of the program. And then we broke out the talent development manager. That's our SDR coach. That's the person who really is doing enablement. That is their job. They have the SDRs both doing the training, also, and we can talk about this. This could be broken out. We've combined it, continuing on and doing the management and the coaching. We do like that they're training and managing to reinforce it. And then we have an ops role. So a sales ops manager is part of that pod, who's helping do all the operations side. So we were able to break it into a cross-functional team within, a pod, as we speak it, to be able to break out and allow people to focus on one key task.
I love this pod concept, and especially because focused around the client as well, and making sure that everyone within that pod can not only enable the sellers, but also make sure that the client is receiving the right attention. And it is hard to do that when clients are very different and vary as they do for you within your scope of work. So that makes a lot of sense. Thinking about specific training initiatives, can you tell us a little bit about a time where you implemented something new, perhaps, and how that went for you?
So I'll talk about what we call our first Wednesdays. So one thing that we realized is that we had developed some onboarding training, and we can talk about that. And you've been great in helping us with that, Natalie, so we appreciate it. But even if you get that right, it's hard to do the continuous reinforcement. So the one good thing we had is, with the pod, we had a manager who has to coach on a weekly basis, is doing call listening, and so there's definitely at least coaching and management and tips. But we decided that it would be fun to create a cadence around the first Wednesdays. And we would choose a topic. And this is important too, I think, with enablement and continuing education, that was sourced by the SDRs and their managers. And so something that they were struggling with or wanted to learn more about. So it could be, probing questions could be one. One could be even keeping good motivation, right? Throughout the day. We wanted to have something where we could get together as a organization and do training on a monthly basis. So we created First Wednesdays, and as I said, we source the topics. I have somebody who helps me create the learnings and whatnot, but then I would present it. So I'd be part of it, and I would present it, but it would also be a discussion. So you bring up an idea, here's some ways to handle objections and whatnot. Let's talk about what are different ideas, what are different ways you guys have done it, what's worked, what hasn't. And it's become this amazing conversation on a monthly basis, where we're reinforcing skills, people are having a chance to contribute. And then the TDMs reinforce that topic over the course of the month, right? So in their team meetings, it's not a one and done. So if it was objection handling, they then talk about objections more during that month to reinforce it, because one of our mantras in training is repeat, repeat, repeat.
I love that. A lot of times that continuous development piece is missing. I've rarely seen it be a focal point within an organization. A lot of times even onboarding is in place. And even when it is, then it's like they get that initial training and then they're off on their own. So I love the fact that you do have this continuous motion of development.
Or I just want, it's one thing I thought of this, I think a really good learning for us too, just with with this is sometimes, great is the enemy of good. And for a long time, we were trying to get things out and trying to have emotion, and like we were building big decks and we wanted to have this whole like certificate, and one day we're just like, you know what, let's pick a topic. Let's have a few things and let's just discuss it. Let's just get it out there. And that was great. Sometimes you're preparing too much, and at least getting something, and then you get learnings. You see what's working and what's not working, and you iterate as you go along. So that's been something that's been helpful for us as well.
I just have to say, and I'm just going to interrupt here for a second. I know we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I really have to commend how involved you are in creating this culture of learning, right? And that's something that we kind of see across the board with different companies, is that leadership sort of puts the onus specifically just on their enablement program managers. But when you have leaders who are so invested in making sure that this is part of that, I think that collaboration just feels like everyone's bought in. But yeah, I just wanted to commend you. It's such a cool idea, and how you're getting involved is very inspiring.
No, thank you, Charles. I appreciate that.
For you, in a world where your dreams come true and how enablement works together, and you've got all of these different teams. So tell us a little bit about how you see these different teams working together towards enablement.
Yeah, I think it's got to be unified, and it start from, I hate to say it, but from the top, right? So people, like you said, Charles, know how important it is, and that this is an initiative, and even it's one of our core values. Personal growth equals sales growth is one of our core values, and so we shout people out for it. So I think it's gotta permeate everywhere. Otherwise, you start getting those silos. You also start getting different people training in different ways, which is okay to an extent, but the TDMs do have their own training. We train them. We have our methodology, but sometimes they'll sort of train on their own things, or they'll stumble upon something and it doesn't necessarily get to the other team members. And by having the first Wednesdays, everyone across all the pods, right? Because that's sort of, there are somewhat of a silo there. We're able to share best practices and be able to see what's working and what's not working for folks. So I really do think that making sure that you've got it, from the top, that you have opportunities to communicate across, different we call them pods, but different functions and whatnot, so that there is alignment. Otherwise, people are going to start butting heads.
Yeah, and I feel like there is this common pain point across all businesses of something called like fractured enablement, right?
Mm,
Everyone is doing their own trainings. Managers are going out there and it's like, oh, my team members need to know this particular product knowledge set, and they go and do their own training. But then everyone else needs that too. And
yeah.
so as resources, become a little bit strained, you see that happening, and so there's this misalignment, right? And it has a negative effect if it's not realigned. So for you, what strategies do you use as a leader to get everyone to be realigned towards a common purpose or a common goal?
Yeah, and I want to call it one thing you just said though too before we dive into that, because I think it's really interesting, and I think you're right that when there's budget constraints, or when people are so that they don't invest in the communication, or they get more silos that happen. And you know what, most effective use of capital is if somebody has come up with something in their group and they've created a training to disseminate that to everyone, right? And so we've seen, like, even us, and we tried it, and I appreciate the kind words, but we still have our silos, and somebody created a training on ways to use our CRM that we didn't train on before, that was like a nuance we hadn't thought of, and one pod was doing, we saw good results, and we're like, what are they doing? And then finally we're like, okay, we got to do this training for everybody, right? So but to really encourage that type of dissemination of knowledge is really important, because like you said, somebody already spent the time to develop it. If it's good for their team, it could be good for other teams.
Is there a way that you, as a leader, or your other leaders sort of encourage this from a much more formal way? Can you tell us a bit how you ensure that people are motivated to want to keep doing that, right? Because sometimes what I've seen is folks create these trainings and they want to bring it out there and they're like, well, that just went nowhere and I did that once. But I'm curious, how does your business sort of motivate the team to continue that communal enablement?
Yeah, so there's a few things. One is that we ask we ask our team, what are things that you've created? What are there things you think that should be put in place? And some people are like, oh, well, I actually just worked with my team on this. They found it really helpful, right? So it's amazing how leaders just don't ask their team or talk to their team and see what's going on. I really do think it's important to get in the trenches. Like the bigger you are, the more silos you have, the more important it is to just walk around, to have meetings with frontline managers, with frontline employees, talk to them, listen to them, ask them questions. I think with Peter Drucker, he says it's like managing by walking around. Now we're a virtual organization, so you can't completely do it. We call it managing by clicking around. So, but I have regular lunches with David where I meet with SDRs, I meet with managers. I just ask them questions. I ask them, what are things that could go better? What are things that are working? And these things bubble up when you're asking those questions. Now, also through that, I think that it creates a culture that people want to, and they know that if they bring up ideas, they're not just going to be squashed down. And that's a cultural thing. A lot of times, if like an SDR on a person's team says, I think we should have this type of management, and you have a culture where it's like, no, you don't tell us what kind of training you want. We tell you what training you want, or you need. And so it's a cultural thing. You need to create a culture where you want people, or people feel comfortable coming up with ideas, no matter what their title or position is. Because to be honest, I really do think that the best ideas for training come from the frontest of frontline employees, because they're the ones who are actually doing the work. So you got to ask them the questions, be open to it, and then execute from there.
This click around the floor mentality is so fun because everyone's so remote and it's very, very hard to ensure that people feel like they're part of that decision making process. And the fact that you have that mindset and you encourage people to speak up and then not knock down voices and just say, how do we repurpose this or put it in alignment with other initiatives, I think sounds so great. And that's sort of like a common theme that we're seeing, right, Natalie, which is leaders going around and trying to figure out, okay, what are these triggers that's going to allow us to do better enablement, right?
And I think what's important to call out here is SalesRoads is fully remote, correct? Remote
That's
first.
correct.
So
Yes, for 16 years.
yeah. So, I mean, I think it's hard enough, even in a on-site type of environment, in office environment, to get people to feel comfortable to open up and share, put out their feedback from the front lines in terms of what's not working, where they're struggling. So it definitely speaks to the power of the culture that you've created and the importance of that, to create that environment where people do feel comfortable to share over like a Zoom type of call.
Yeah. And I think it's the action. So just to give you one more example, I mentioned the 2024 goal setting. That wasn't something that was on our radar, but one of our SDRs slacked me and said, I had done this training with Post-it notes and how to do goal setting and things like that. And I jumped on a call with her along with the individual who creates the first Wednesday's training. And we learned about it and we're like, this is great. Would you want to do it? And she ran that first Wednesday training, right? And so everybody, saw, so not only did she come up with the idea, but she has like a side business where she does like, a lot of these types of things just
Cool.
because she enjoys it. And so we had her run it. So it was a lot of fun.
A lot of times when we're thinking about enablement initiatives and prioritizing, what are data points that you look for to guide your training enablement investments?
Yeah, and this is tough. It's tough because there's so many variables that can often impact these things. But there are a few things that we really do look at closely. One is churn, like I mentioned. One is SDR percentage, attainment to goal. So what percentage of our team is hitting goal, exceeding goal? And then we try to tie, if we've implemented something new, is there a correlation between hitting goal and what we put in place? It's tough because there's obviously a lot of other things that can impact those metrics, right? But that's the best guidance that we have, at least from a high level KPI. The other thing we do is we love pulse surveys. So after onboarding, we try to get a survey just to hear, like, how did it go? What is their feeling about things? Our head of HR meets with people after the first week just to get a sense of things. So we do look at some of that more anecdotal data. I mean, pulse surveys can be quantifiable, but still, it's one snapshot in time, and not necessarily seeing their actual outcomes, seeing their perception of how good it was. So we try to look at all those different types of things to help us triangulate around what's working and what's not working.
Right. No, absolutely. And I'm glad that you're talking about the pulse surveys, because getting that feedback is incredibly important in terms of guiding future training areas that are needed. I guess has there ever been a time when your managers within the pods have raised a gap that they've seen organizationally? And how do you kind of look at that top down to determine what are the right next priorities to focus in on to continue to improve in enablement efforts?
Yeah, so what we try to do, and this is more holistic, but enablement will come up in it, is we look at things on a quarterly and yearly basis as far as what's working and what's not working. So we try to understand from our teams, what's working at SalesRoads, what's not working at SalesRoads, and then we try on a quarterly basis to say, what can we get done in a quarter that's quantifiable, and that we know we got it done, and somebody has the bandwidth to push it forward. So, for instance, in 2023, one of our goals was to revamp the onboarding training process. And so that was, a really important thing for us. We had gotten feedback as far as, some of the materials were even, a little outdated and things like that. So we tried to revamp it. So I think looking at these things on a quarterly basis and then really understanding and being true to yourself, what's doable in a quarter, or a year, and who's got the bandwidth and the right type of capability to lead that effort. And we have gotten better at it, but definitely for a number of years, we always our eyes were bigger than our stomach. We would say, oh, we can achieve all these things, and it's a problem. Because what happens is you go through the quarter, you get it half done, and then maybe another priority comes up, and then you switch over. So you've got to have both the discipline to say, okay, this is about as much as I'm going to do. And even if other priorities come up, unless the house is burning, right? This is the priority we set for the quarter. We're not going to switch to something new and shining, because otherwise you're just going to be switching and switching and switching. So, and we have a whole methodology around how we try to figure out those we call them rocks, those quarterly rocks and yearly goals.
I love that you're talking about the importance of focusing in on priorities and not constantly switching them, because I have seen this come up a lot in the past where, when there isn't any set key priorities, whether it's within a specific function of the business or just across the org. Is there a time when there was clear ROI associated with a particular enablement investment or initiative that you had?
Yeah, I mean, so the pod, and that's, I started there, is the pod structure was so big. And I feel like if you do not have your org chart right, from an enablement standpoint, or just business in general, it's tough to get results. You can have the best training in the world, but if you don't have managers who are going to reinforce that training, you're not going to see results. People come out, and we've all been in trainings. Oh, that was amazing. It was the best training ever. And then you ask them 3 months later, what did you learn? I can't remember, but it was great training. So, so having that right chart is so important. And we saw an increase or I guess it would be a decrease in churn by 25%. Like it was material by just changing the org chart around. So it was, that was a huge win for us. And I really do think you've got to have people own enablement, otherwise nobody owns it.
If no one owns it, nothing's going to
Or
happen.
even worse, if two people own it, right? And is more, like, so if two people are supposed to be doing, enablement, or one person's supposed to be doing, two things, it's too hard. You got to have a singular focus on it.
We definitely have enjoyed having you here today. We always want to close it out with any final thoughts that you have. What is your love letter to enablers, to trainers, and cross-functional partners? What message do you have for them?
It's one of those things that you look at and you say, it's going to be expensive. I'm going to take people off the phones, things like that. But you can't. All the best organizations in the world have world-class training programs. Disney, Starbucks. You look at the companies that really deliver the same type of experience for their customers day in and day out, and that's because they invest in their training. And it's the same with sales training. If you don't invest in your sales training and your team, you're going to have varied results. You're not going to be able to have the type of up and to the right line for your sales that you want. It's going to be bumpy. It's going to go up and down. But if you create a great enablement program that shows people how to be successful in their roles, and you invest in it and you reinforce it, it's going to set sales leaders free. And so it's really so important. It's unfortunate. It's one of the most overlooked things because people are like, oh, it's just too much. We can do it on the job, things like that. But really, when you create that right, you have the people who are leading the charge. You've got a great process around it. It's the way to create replicatable results. And so I encourage everybody to really invest in it.
Invest in structure, process for great results. Well, this has been a great result having you come onto our show. Thank you so much, David. We hope that you enjoyed it as much as we have enjoyed interviewing you.
No, thank you, Charles. It was great to be here. Thanks, Natalie. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been so great to have this conversation. Stay tuned for future episodes to hear from other leaders. I know our next one, we've got another C-level person talking to us about how they lead their teams. So stay tuned, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Until next time. Bye.